Hey everyone, my name is Ari, and that is Diana, who is giving me some direction, who is here with LA Press Club and opened up the space to us. So can we please give her a huge round of applause in the LA Press Club? Thank you. This isn't, it's, I don't know if you've read about the claw, like how many things now we can hold in our hands all at once, but this is really me maxing that out right now. Yeah, so my name is Ari. If you don't know me, I am the founder and executive director of LA Reporting Collective. You might have known it previously as LA Radio Club, and it is a little journalism nonprofit that supports local journalists and civic media makers in whatever way we can, really. We run a reporting fellowship. We match early career reporters with mentors, and we throw events like this, sometimes with workshops, sometimes with wine, sometimes with both. We started out mostly in audio, hence our former name, LA Radio Club, but now we are working with folks who are doing writing and video and photo, including a bunch of journalists that you're going to be hearing from tonight. And the work that LARC, LARC, LA Reporting Collective, whatever you want to call it, does is just all reverse engineered from the idea that it shouldn't be limited, the opportunities inside of reporting and hyper-local journalism, to people who already have connections or who already have the confidence to go out there. And we want to help you all do that. So that's a little bit about us. Again, this is the LA Press Club space that does amazing work that's opened their doors to us tonight. So tonight, what are we here for? Just quick show of hands. Who here knows someone that has been detained by ICE or detained while covering immigration? Okay, and then show of hands, who knows someone whose daily life has changed this summer as a result of ICE and immigration enforcement? So, this is really just not something that is specific to news stories, but really affects us all daily in our life. There was a political investigation that found that ICE arrested 2,000 people in 7 SoCal counties this past month, most with no prior convictions, including U.S. citizens who were swept up in the mix. There has been thousands of California National Guard members and hundreds of Marines deployed to L.A., and I think that there is an ambient fear that just pervades daily life in this city, a low-grade, constant hum of a city under surveillance, a mood that you don't need to hear sirens to know that something is wrong just around the corner. And for communities on the ground, it is scary. For journalists doing that coverage, it is risky. And for people that are trying to pay attention, it can feel honestly overwhelming. So that's why we wanted to hold this space, to slow things down a bit, to gather in person, to talk, to listen, and to maybe feel a little bit less alone in it. So we're going to hear from some incredible reporters tonight. You all have the program that we just handed out that explains who is on the panels tonight and has a little bit of information if you'd like to follow along. But to start us off, we have Dana Amihere, who is the, please come on up, the founder of AfroLA, and she is going to be moderating a conversation with two folks that help journalists do what they do. We have Meredith from the ACLU here, and Adam, who leads the press rights work at the LA Press Club. And now what we're trying to figure out is how to get over here, because I'm standing in the way of where everyone's going to be sitting. But they're going to kick us off with a little bit about what they've been seeing. And so, yes, like you were doing, let's give them a hand.
Hello, everyone. I promise I'm not checking my email. I saved a digital tree, so let's just go with it.
I'm checking my email. And Blue Sky.
All right. Well, we all know that these are not normal times. These things are far from anything that I think most of us have ever experienced. So I really want to start off just talking about what should people know about the attacks on the press right now. This is, even for us out in the field and reporting, this is different. How?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there is no such thing as normal, and that that's okay. There's not a normal in terms of how police are treating press. There's not a normal in terms of how protesters sometimes treat press. And there's not a normal in terms of who is the press. And that's probably the most important point that I want to make is that, often people in command staff structures like police think about this top-down rigid structure, and you have a credential and you don't. The whole idea of the First Amendment, the whole idea of a free press is an informed public. That's what this is all about, and democracy doesn't work without that. So anyone who goes out there to document, not participate in protest, but to document it and to share that with the world is committing an act of journalism, and that's what we have to protect. And so what we have seen recently, and where it does feel a lot different, is that while these types of incidents where journalists are shot with so-called less lethal munitions or where they are detained or arrested, that's not entirely new, but the pace has picked up in a very scary way. We saw this in 2000 at the DNC. We saw this in 2007 at the May Day Melee, 2011 Occupy, 2020 BLM protests in the George Floyd violence. And we saw it again in 2021 with Echo Park, in 2022 with Dobbs' decision and abortion rights protests. So it's happened. It's not new in that sense. To have about 100 incidents in about a 2-week period is really scary.
So given that we've had more instances and more frequent instances of members of the press having their rights violated, being assaulted, being detained, being accosted, what can we do as press, and what can we do to help press stay safe?
Most important thing is to share your stories. Keep telling your stories. Tell the stories that are most important about the people who are, being taken by ICE. That's what you're out there usually to cover in these sorts of situations, and make sure you can do that. But also, if you can't tell the story, you actually are the story, and that's okay. People are used to the idea in journalism, the sort of old structured rule that was invented. I mean, all of this is new, right? There were no standards to journalism 200 years ago. And when the first amendment was written, there were no standards. My mic cutting in and out, by the way? Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh,
all right. How about this? Is this any better? Am I kicking?
That's yours.
All right.
Even on stage, we're getting tangled up in chorus.
Look at what LAPD just did to me. Is this working?
I think let's try
the handheld. All right. Third time's the charm. Much better. All right. There we go. What were we talking about? I think it was the police. So with the idea of what can journalists do is not only to tell the story that you're out there to tell, but when you cannot tell the story, it's okay to break the rule that the press should not be part of the story. You are the story all of a sudden, because that is the most important thing in democracy, is the ability of the press to function. Without that, it's not that press rights are superior to these other rights of immigrants or to any other citizen or civilian. It's that all the other rights depend on those rights of the free press. So the most important thing it is to remember that you can tell the story about yourself. If you were denied access, if you were obstructed, if you were hurt, that's okay to make yourself a part of that story. And I've seen everyone from major TV networks to independent and freelance and student journalists do that. It's okay. However, a lot of people still don't feel that's okay. And so people need to get over that. And in particular, I think unions need to step up right now, labor unions for journalists, to be able to speak up on their behalf, because in some cases, I do know lawyers who are keeping their large newsroom outlet staff and personnel from talking about these incidents. So we really need to share more about what's going on.
So there's a critical need for, when we become part of the story, to share that story so that we can move accountability for the things that are happening to us as journalists.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I would offer up also, so the ACLU of Southern California is litigating a case against the Department of Homeland Security, and we're going to talk later about how there is a careful web of civil rights lawyers covered cases against lots of quote-unquote law enforcement agencies. But in our case, we not only are representing members of the LA Press Club, individual members of the press, we're also representing individual protesters and legal observers. And so it kind of touches on what Adam just mentioned, that there are, in the modern day, people are coming to witness and to observe, and the definitions between those categories are a little bit blurred. And so we are really appreciative of having members of the press as part of our case, because there is a privilege, I think, that comes along with being a member of the press, and it uplifts the stories of the other folks who are involved in the case. And so we feel like without that perspective, it would be harder to be able to litigate on behalf of individual protesters, many of whom may have family members who have come from or have mixed status and don't feel like they can put their name on a declaration with impunity. And so it's been very helpful to have the narratives that you all uplift in your stories, but also your own personal narratives, because it enables us to better protect the rights of all.
So just to pivot a little bit, Adam has this beautiful collection of things that can keep us safe in your kind of protest go bag that you can come up in a costume about later if you'd like. We also have this really great flyer that Lark was able to put together for us that with QR codes to specific guides. If you're out at a protest or you're preparing to go out to one, things that you should think about and things that you can do while you're out in the field to hopefully keep yourself and your colleagues safe. So to that end, know that people have been getting hurt, people's rights have been violated. What are the status of some of the lawsuits that are pending right now, and who's involved?
So we have 3 lawsuits, and so that's an important distinction. All of these are federal lawsuits. The Press Club is a organizational plaintiff on all 3, but we're joined by a number of other wonderful organizations, news outlets on some of these, as well as individuals in the third case, which is the DHS case, which I'll pass off to you in a second. The update I'll give is that of these 3 cases, the one that's gotten the furthest so far is the one that's against the city of Los Angeles related to the Los Angeles Police Department. Thank you. Yes, it's a big win. So we have a temporary restraining order that was issued a couple Fridays ago, and that has now been extended. So that's sort of the breaking news here. That temporary restraining order reminds, obviously, LAPD that, hey, there's a law we got passed a few years ago, but also it adds some extra things. Like it says, instead of just getting a supervisor, police are supposed to get a captain, which is pretty high up the chain of command whenever there's a dispute over who's press. It also makes specific reference, not to the word sight and sound access, but essentially saying that it's not just okay to let press generally near, they actually have to be able to functionally do their job. So that will continue to go through the process towards a preliminary injunction. Again, the TRO has been extended. Hopefully, after a preliminary injunction, we get some sort of permanent injunction. It has more teeth and more specifics in that. The Sheriff's Department case is the second case. This is against the County of Los Angeles. And in that one, we're a little bit slower on this right now, but there's plenty of incidents and plenty of examples. So there is no temporary restraining order yet. We aren't even to that point in that particular case, but I can see that coming along probably in the next couple of weeks. Either way, it's obviously up to a judge to decide on that. And then the third really big and really important case is against the Department of Homeland Security. And for that, I'll hand off the mic.
So we're very proud to be representing LA Press Club, News Guild, and individual members of the press, as well as I said, protesters and legal observers. In this case, we've also filed in the Central District of California. It's against the Department of Homeland Security. We filed in the middle of June. Time feels like such a vague concept right now. And we also filed a request for a temporary restraining order. At the time of our filing and our complaint, we uplifted factual scenarios from protests from June 6th to June 9th in downtown LA around MDC, in Paramount, and also in Santa Ana. At the time that we filed our TRO, we were assigned to one judge who issued a ruling that indicated that he didn't think there was a substantial likelihood that the conduct would continue. We disagree. We believe, and we have now demonstrated, I think, in a new factual record, that there have been other incidents across Los Angeles County, now Santa Barbara, and Ventura County, where that same collection of individuals have continued to be harmed by use of force by DHS. And so just last Friday, we filed a motion for a preliminary injunction. We've since been reassigned to a new judge, the same judge who has the LAPD case. And so we are hopeful. We presented a new factual record that includes incidents from Maywood and Carpinteria and Camarillo, and also are interested in uplifting stories from people who've been harmed while trying to observe individual takings of people. So like there are these bigger, large-scale protests that organize, but then there's also the one brave person who pulls out their phone to try to document someone being taken from their community who happens to get tear gassed in the process. So while I have the mic, small pitch that if any of you are impacted by any of this and you would like to talk to me, please do so. And also, I know that part of what's made it so difficult to report right now is the alphabet soup of agencies that falls under DHS. And so we deeply appreciate careful reporting in that realm, understanding what the uniforms look like, what the insignia are, because a lot of people are very confused. As soon as they see fatigues, they think it's the Marines or they think it's the National Guard, but often it is people who fall within that DHS umbrella.
If I could just quickly add, on this list of QR codes, the top right one is a field guide. It's best done on looked at on a desktop, and it's basically a photo guide to all these uniforms, to the types of less lethal munitions. There's some tricky stuff out there. A rubber bullet isn't really what they're using. That's like from Northern Ireland and in Gaza, and it's not it's like a 2.7% fatality rate on those things. They're really scary. We are dealing more with foam rounds. LLMs is the general term for that.
We've talked a lot about how journalists are responding in terms of attending protests, journalists who are part of newsrooms who are facilitating journalists to go to protest. But I want to take a second to acknowledge newsrooms like AfroLA and others who are providing information in ways that aren't necessarily like spot news or real-time coverage of protest. So in terms of the newsroom that I run, AfroLA, we're a nonprofit newsroom that focuses on news primarily from Black and marginalized communities, but not solely. We tell news through the lens of the Black community, but not just as a Black press organization. But one of the very intentional decisions that I made as the leader of our newsroom is we're not covering protest, at least not in the way that a lot of other organizations are. We're not actually attending protest, in part because we're a very small staff, and I know that there are some very small groups, some very scrappy citizen journalists and freelancers who are out here managing the same types of limited resources as well. But we chose to do it this way because we feel like we can contribute in a different way. There are a lot of people out there on the front lines. There are a lot of journalists who are risking their safety in order to do that. And I can say as a news leader, I definitely appreciate everything that all of these other journalists and news organizations do. So I felt that it was really important for us to take a step back and realize what lane can we be in? Where can we fit in? And for us, that's been really looking at impact and solutions journalism, trying to help people understand kind of how we got here by looking backward and where that might take us forward. So looking at things like, legal precedent and how due process and other things have been infringed upon. And, like Meredith was talking about, who is actually responsible for some of these people being taken into custody? Who are you dealing with? So I want to pivot a little bit to talking about collaboration with press rights folks like yourselves, Adam, from a press rights standpoint, and then Meredith at the ACLU. What are some ways that journalists and news organizations can lean on folks like yourselves and others who are not necessarily news organizations? What can we look to you for?
Really important to remember that we're a community. And it's not just about, getting the scoop and one news outlet versus another, which is kind of think about Anchorman in the fight scene, right? That's not really what it's like. Sometimes it feels a little bit like that, but that's not the reality. Certainly not today, not in an era where the economics of the news industry are really hurting and where we all really need to look out for each other. So that's on every single level. Collaboration is a really good thing. That's on the level of individual journalists to individual journalists in the field. Look out for your fellow journalists when you're out there. Share each other's phone numbers, signal numbers, stay in touch. Backwatch each other, because often you're not out there with a 5-person crew. You're out there solo. So that person who might be your rival for a scoop, they're also your best friend getting out of jail, and they should be. In terms of news organizations, they should look at it the same way and collaborate with each other and share notes. And that's part of what is happening tonight with groups that will be up on stage next talking even more about this. And so that's a really exciting thing to me to see there's that level of collaboration between orgs. And then for the ones that are the nonprofit sort of support organizations, also remember that it's a huge community of us. So the LA Press Club, obviously we welcome everyone to be a member, and you can sign up through our website. We have organizational memberships, but there's a lot of other great organizations too, and we collaborate with them. So part of the reason we're here today, part of the reason we have this TRO with LAPD is because of Senate Bill 98. That was a huge collective push, and so 24 organizations. And just to name a few of the really important ones, we've got Media Guild of the West, unions involved in that. We've got SPJ, NAHJ, NABJ, AAJA. That bill is not in state law if it weren't for the collective effort of all of these groups. So whatever groups you want to join, there's so many great ones out there, and I'm missing dozens of them. I mean, it's unfair to even name a few, but I know that those put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears with us to make that bill a possibility. Know that those organizations appreciate your membership, they appreciate your support, and if nothing else, if you have, if you're struggling to pay a membership due, we'll have programs to help with that. But talk. share information, because if we as a community have that information about when your rights are violated, we can then act, we can fight, we can share that with the wonderful attorneys who are working pro bono and working extraordinary hours to make sure that we can actually fight to protect those rights as a community long term. Very little about this. Certainly the cases that LA Press Club is on, none of this is about getting damages. We're not asking for money. We're asking to defend the community over the course of years to come.
Very well said.
I would just add that I think that you all are working in very traumatizing circumstances. I was a public defender for a long time before I came to the ACLU, so I'm no stranger to secondary trauma. And I know that part of that is that you minimize the things that happen to you because you are called to a vocation and you feel like you need to put that behind you so that you can move forward with your job. But the things that you're experiencing are traumatizing. I've spoken to reporters who have said, like, well, I was just tear gassed. I've learned a lot about the medical impacts of tear gas. It's significant. And so if you were tear gassed, if you were very close to being clocked with a tear gas canister or hit with a projectile weapon, that is still a harm. And so I would encourage you to kind of like create some space to think about that and to document it, to take pictures of yourself, just as you would take pictures of another story, and to keep your medical records. And then if you feel empowered to do so, please reach out. I mean, Adam is the most incredible resource. I don't know how he's carrying all of this summer. We owe it a debt of gratitude to him. You have other great resources in the News Guild if you happen to be a member. I hope that you all can be in places where you have union resources. If not, I hope you can push for them because we would love to be able to uplift your voices. But if you feel quietly like, well, maybe this wasn't that bad because I did see something worse happen, then it's harder for us to get to those stories. So please, that's my slight pitch for you to take care of yourselves and then tell us about what happened to you.
One last thing before we wrap up. I know we've talked a lot about organizations and people who can help in terms of physical safety, who can help for advocacy in terms of us as journalists. One organization that I want to shout out that you may or may not be aware of is Trusting News, who are always pushing for transparency and accountability in coverage. And while they haven't necessarily targeted immigration as a specific subject, at least not yet, because there's more coming to that. So stay tuned. If you RSVP'd for this event, you'll get a note. But Trusting News and other organizations like them encourage us to be accountable for the coverage that we put out. They encourage us and they give us resources and examples of, when we didn't do so great and of how we can do better. And how, when we've gotten it wrong, we're able to, admit the error, learn from it, and be transparent with our audiences about, how we're going to rectify that in the future. And I want to offer myself up as an example at AfroLA. We had an article where we were talking about, arrest versus detentions. One of the things that's come up in our reporting, as I'm sure with others, is how to talk about some of these things. It's new terminology for a lot of people. It's new terminology for some of our readers. So being able to connect with organizations like Trusting News and others who can help us make that language as accessible as possible so that people not only understand what is happening, but they can understand what their rights are as these things are happening is of critical importance. Trust in journalists, unfortunately, is at a very low point right now. Trust in government and a lot of other things right now are at a low point. So anything that we can do to build trust with our audiences as well as keep ourselves safe is tantamount. So thank you.
I'll quickly add on that trust part. Think about language, think about terminology. I mentioned rubber bullets before. Don't parrot things, right? Officer-involved shooting. I mean, we've been annoyed about that, angry about that for years because that's kind of, it's a propaganda technique. How is the officer involved? Someone shot someone, right? Subject, verb, object. It's not an officer-involved shooting, and it's really... Yeah, less lethal weapon, less than lethal. No, it's not less than lethal. It's less lethal. Even then, It's really euphemistic. Awful to think about that. That's our standard. Also, in terms of terminology, I have this whole suite of gear here. This is a small fraction of what some journalists are using in the field today. We don't really have time to get into it on stage, but please come up after if you want a demo, if you want me to show you what people are using. And when you think about getting it right, you want to make sure that your gear is up to the right standards. Z87 plus goggles, P100 filters, level 3A soft armor if you're in a situation that requires that. You don't want swim goggles thinking that might help because you might have your eye popped out. You really got to think about this stuff. So on that point, think about your health, think about your safety, and make sure you're properly prepared. Get it right just the way you would get it right for a story. Talk to me. Use the guides that are linked on the sheet that was handed out before with those QR codes. All of those things will help a lot.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
You can find us, any of us, after.
I want to introduce the next panel here, and so there's just a lot of powerful journalism in the space, as evident by how hard it was to break back into the conversation here. So many good stories that we could spend hours and hours talking about from so many great reporters. But tonight with us, we've got 3 wonderful reporters from 3 wonderful outlets and a terrific moderator of Leslie Berestein Rojas, who I worked with at LAist and now works at USC Annenberg, to lead a conversation about what is happening inside of several different local newsrooms, so you can hear the perspective of people who are heavily involved in the work that we are here tonight to celebrate. So I'm going to bring up Leslie and Mariah and Jessica and Jeremy, and let's give them a big round of applause. And I'm going to hand it over to Leslie.
Are they on? Oh, yeah, they're on. Okay, good. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Is this on? Hello? Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you all for making the trip out here tonight. It's great to see this packed house. We have a lot to cover, a lot of ground to cover. I'm Leslie Berestein Rojas. I've been a journalist in Los Angeles for a long, long time. I teach at USC now. I'm the director of audio news at USC Annenberg, an associate professor there. And anyway, I'd like to start with introducing our guests here, our panelists. So first of all, we'll start with Jeremy Lindenfeld, right? Lindenfeld? Okay, yes. A reporter and UC Berkeley local news fellow with Capital and Maine. Jeremy reports on public lands, healthcare, labor organizing, and inequality, and his work has been featured in publications that include ProPublica, Rolling Stone, Salon, and USA Today. We have Mariah Castañeda, who is the audience director and co-founder at LA Public Press. And Mariah has split her career between journalism and voter education and was one of the driving forces behind LA Taco's growth into the great news publication that it is today. She's also the reporter and voice of the Sellout podcast, an award-winning podcast that details the rise and fall of a certain federally indicted former LA City Council member. Covered environmental issues and local politics. Her work has been featured in LA Taco, New York Times, Voice of OC, and Fusion. Welcome, Mariah. Welcome, Jeremy. And Jessica Perez, who's the senior editor leading Boyle Heights beat. Before, she spent 6 years at LA Times, first as assistant editor on the news desk, then as community editor of De Los. She's also worked as a digital producer at NBC Los Angeles, spent a year as a fellow at USC Annenberg, and there she established the South LA Community Desk. Jessica was born in Mexico, grew up in Boyle Heights, and was deputy editor of The Beat in its early days. Welcome, Jessica. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so before we start, who here has reported on immigration, even tangentially? Okay, all right, good show of hands. Okay, so you know what we're talking about here. Okay, so we're going to talk about how we as local journalists are reporting on immigration and immigrant communities right now at this critical moment, right? The stories that matter, the obstacles we face, what it means to cover our immigrant communities, often our own communities, with care, with respect, and with responsibility, right? Responsibly. We're also going to talk later about something the previous panel alluded to, which is the personal nature of our work and coping with that. But first, I'm going to back up a little bit. So I remember the first week of the first Trump administration. There had been some angry rhetoric, right? There had been some threats, but none of us really knew what to expect in the immigration sphere. And yet within a few days of the inauguration, I found myself camping out overnight at LAX, reporting on families whose loved ones had flown in from Middle East countries and were being detained as they landed. or in some cases being turned around and sent back. This was the start of what would become known as the Muslim ban. And it was the start of a host of policies that tore lives and families apart. That was just the beginning. Now you all are covering and editing these stories, and it's a lot. So we're really eager to hear from you. We'll hear from some of you too as well. So we're going to go down the line. So I'd love for all of you to give us a bit of an overview on some of the stories that you've worked on recently, and also what you've learned from working on these stories as reporters and editors. Jeremy, I'd like to start with you. You were in the thick of some protests recently. Please tell us about that.
Yeah. So I've been at the protests since they really began in early June, and it has been quite a journey since. I think at the start of it all, there was...
I think we're getting some feedback. I might just have you guys pass your mic down.
Thank you. At the start of it all, I think there was some confusion and a trepidation in my newsroom trying to figure out just how are we going to cover all of this. I think it's a question that we're still asking ourselves. Because we don't often do very fast turnaround coverage. But I sort of cut my teeth doing protest coverage before I was really in a newsroom doing journalism. So I knew that I wanted to be out there covering what I could. And yeah, just since then, just developing sort of longer term investigations. And that's what I've been up to. Yeah.
And then Jessica. Yes.
I'm sorry.
We were talking about some of the work you've done recently, and some of the stories that you shared with us were, for example, you've been talking to local businesses about how they're protecting themselves, or about how people who were not activists who have wound up deciding to take an activist role, right? Just really deep dives within the community, talking to folks, and I'd love to hear about what you've been doing recently.
Yeah, I'll back up and actually start with sharing how we first sort of established ourselves as to think about how we were going to cover immigration and to share our approach with our audience, to share that approach with our reporters, to really guide them as well. So we sort of set ourselves up to under these pillars, if you will. At the beginning, we know we're service. We provide a service to our community. So resource sharing was one of the most important things that we thought we could bring to our community. So that was a given. Stories on economic impact, just to show how people on the ground, like you said, were affected. How, from businesses to street vendors. We also wanted to share stories on from the community, straight direct from their voices. What were they doing to mobilize? What were they doing to protect each other, their neighbors? What solutions were they coming up with? Because maybe they weren't getting it from the leaders that that are supposed to be providing safety. Stories on accountability as well, which for us we're a small newsroom, so. We do rely on several of our media partners. We're under something that's called the LA Local News Initiative. And through that, we have sort of an ecosystem of media partners in Los Angeles that we can rely on. And we see that to be able to share content, to be able to share stories. And so LA Public Press is part of that media cohort. So is LAist, so is Cal Matters. And so we rely on that, on them to kind of share some of those stories as well. And that's just kind of one of our sort of starting points of how are we going to cover this? How are we going to approach this? And what's going to guide our reporting so our audience also knows what to expect from us. I don't know if the stories will come up.
They're not
eventually.
coming up.
They're not.
No, they're not.
That's why I wasn't sure.
It didn't come up.
Well, I didn't know if you want to see Jeremy's clip.
Oh, sure, let's see it. I'm sorry.
All right.
Why not? Okay.
Oh, sure.
No. Just the thing was coming up.
I think what we're going to be watching here is just a bit of a clip I did about LAPD expenses related to the anti-ICE protests. The numbers in this are likely very outdated. I think the last figure I saw from Kenneth Mejia was about $30 million on LAPD expenses as of June 17th. And that's not counting the lawsuits that are likely going to end in settlement. But yeah, this is a clip from when those numbers were a little smaller.
Law enforcement's crackdown on recent protests across Los Angeles has cost the city more than $17 million, with the price tag likely to keep ballooning. The Los Angeles Police Department has played a critical role in violently shutting down anti-ICE protests across the city since the Department of Homeland Security began executing immigration raids at local workplaces on June 6th. LAPD officers have arrested 575 people and fired hundreds of crowd control munitions at demonstrators. As of Monday, June 16th, the city had spent more than $17.2 million on the LAPD's response to protests, according to LA City Controller Kenneth Mejia.
I think those numbers are like especially stark in a city that is, struggling with its budget, has had to cut city positions. I know there was recently another vote to approve a $17.3 million loan for LAPD overtime expense, not counting that, overtime expenses related to ICE activity. So, the reason I wanted to cover this, and a lot of folks covers like the LAPD, LASD angle of this, is because even though this is under the umbrella of kind of like the federal occupation that we're all under, there is a lot of levels of accountability on a local level that we can put pressure on. And I think we have an outsized share of ability to influence that more so than we do, directly or as fast on the federal level. We can put pressure on like local officials and local departments more so than we can on like federal departments.
Right. At the same time, protests, people who are angry about what is happening with people being dragged away. This is what has really prompted the protest. Not a riot, it was a protest. Right.
Totally.
Right. Okay. So now can we move on to, great. Okay, here we are. All right. Boyle Heights beat. So back to how you got there. Yes.
And so now that I set up how we got here, yes. So this is one example of a story that we, that really kind of fit into the community voice, what people are doing, and the way that this story came about. Our reporter Alejandra Molina, who is in the audience somewhere, a couple of us, including her, went to a meeting. We have community partners and organizations that we are in close contact with, who are working with people who are directly impacted. And so we went to a meeting that asked folks, whoever wants to come and help, whoever wants to find out how they can help, be in a network. And so when we were there, it was at a church. It was a packed house, mostly people in their 20s and 30s. And we started asking, like, are you part of an activist organization? Are you part of a group here that, and most of the people that were there were like, no, I've never done anything like this before. This is the first time I've ever gotten involved. They were anything from teachers to software engineers to just people who were ordinary, residents who just wanted to find a way to help their neighbors. And so it was just, really beautifully told about just how people can, mobilize, how people can find ways to create solutions in their communities. And then the second one, this one ties into, it's part one of two stories. The second story came out today, really focusing around business impact. And this one here was really about how businesses are adapting amid these raids. Some of them said, now we're locking our doors. We're not letting anybody in unless they're customers. They're putting up warning signs, saying you can't, ICE is not welcome here. Don't come in, private property. They're even using kids to guard the doors sometimes. So it's really telling. And the second part of that story that we published today really just goes into how much of that financial strain they're going through. One of the restaurants, we surveyed about 15 restaurants in Boyle Heights, and one of them said, we've lost up to $15,000 in just a few weeks. And about half of them said that, half of their customer base was gone. So it's a dire time for them. And while leaders are paying attention, and several people are saying it's not enough. We need direct assistance. And so it touches on that.
So Jessica and Mariah, both of your organizations have been really working with deep community sources to find stories, to find tips, to find stories that are unique. LA Public Press recently broke a story about DHS agents staying in local hotels, right? I'd love to hear a little bit about what LA Public Press is doing, again, covering the developments that are happening with immigration.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And before I begin, I just want to really shout out the great work that's going on at Capitol and Main and Boyle Heights Beat. Phenomenal. So before I get into that, I really need to tell you a very quick story, very fast, I promise. So when we first started LA Public Press, we had to find our audience. And we were thinking, okay, who do we serve first? And I wanted to choose the audience I know best. I'm from Huntington Park. I'm from Southeast LA. I wanted to start there because I felt like, we needed more coverage there. So me and Amanda is our community engagement producer. She actually went to high school with me. And then later on, I got to go poach her from CBS. And she is amazing. So she and I went around. We surveyed a bunch of people in Southeast LA. We built community trust 2 or 3 years ago. We were giving out bags and with our logo and all this stuff. Needless to say, we really try to make sure we had those community partners. We had those community trust ahead of time. So that's how we were able to get some, and that's how we were able to get some of these stories. And then also we heard from our audience from LA broadly. They heard that they want to know the stories. They want to know what's going on. They want to know who the decision makers are. They want to know how they can get involved, but they also don't want to be traumatized by the news, right? And that sometimes, a lot of times we publish sad stories, but we also want to publish stories about folks that are rising above what's happening, advocating for themselves, and taking charge. So our first story I think that we're mentioning is about a young, aspiring Marine. He had decided the week before this event happened that he wanted to go join and enlist in the Marine. And I feel like a lot of folks here, I'm sure, especially for Latino, you probably are that one cousin that is all about the military, right? All about America. He was that one cousin. But unfortunately, in in Bell, there was an attack. There was an immigration raid, and community members came out to go protect their fellow community members that were being raided at this car wash. I know the mayor Cudahy. She's about my age. We're friends, we're acquaintances. And I see the live video happening. Amanda sends it to me, and I'm like, oh my God, what's happening to Liz? So we're watching this unfold. And immediately we put out a video about it, but we're like, okay, what else is going on? We see this young man being attacked by immigration authorities. He's being tackled by a dozen of them. And it was horrifying to watch. And Amanda was able to go talk to this young man's family. This young man's family was not able to go contact with him. They couldn't find him for 70 hours. It was terrifying. Imagine your child is just being taken away. You can't find them in any detention center log. You can't find them anywhere. So she was able to go talk to the family. She was able to talk to the business owners in the area that had footage of what happened. And because she's from Huntington Park, because she's from Southeast LA, the family trusted her. They didn't want to talk to any other newsroom. They only wanted to talk to Amanda. And I felt so privileged in that moment that Amanda had that trust and that buy-in from the community. And she did such a great job. I wish she was here. She could get the props. But I've told her this already. It was just phenomenal, the work that she did. And also, we talked about verbiage earlier, right? We talked about verbiage. So folks over there, they don't want to be called protesters. They want to be called protectors. And that verbiage is very important. It's very important how we use our words. And I loved how she had that context. I can also talk about the hotel story right now, too, right after.
You can talk about the hotel story. Yeah. Because, what I love about what you all are doing is that this is not the 10,000-foot view, right?
Yeah.
And you're reporting from the community, and this is where the stories are real. immediate. And, just like everybody has the cousin, the rah-rah cousin, everybody also has the cousin or the aunt or the tia or the sibling who's, really struggling right now. And so the community is really where you have to tell these stories. And that's what I really love about what you're doing. So please tell us more about how you're doing it. Yes.
Yeah, how we're doing it. Okay, well, the No Sleep for Ice story. It was a story about a hotel. There was a hotel, and I want to say it was in Glendale. I'm drawing a blank. It's been a long week, everybody, where it's only Wednesday. But we got a tip. We saw this thing called No Sleep for Ice. Oh, it's Thursday. Wow. It's Thursday. It's been a long week. Oh my God, it's Thursday. Amazing. Anyways, so yeah, No Sleep for Ice. We heard about this event happening. We were immediately, I was thinking like, let's go cover it. I have a breaking news mindset, which isn't good. I'm so grateful for editor-in-chief. It's like, no, let's slow it down. Slow it down. And the story that Phoenix did with Elizabeth was incredible because it was basically about these hotel workers had noticed that there were immigration authorities staying at their hotel that they were working at. And then these immigration authorities were actually talking to the staff, and they were trying to ask them questions about their immigration status, which is horrible, right? So they go and they tell people around them like, hey, what's going on? So immediately the community comes out. Their friends come out, the people come out, and they start banging on pots and pans. And then more and more people come out because the people of LA were not going to stand for that, right? And it became something that became replicated more and more. People saw this one act of resistance, and it inspired them. So now you see more and more No Sleep for Ice activities all over LA, all over the county. And I think it's important for our city right now that's going through so much trauma, so much pain. We're seeing our friends, our family members, people we know, people in our neighborhoods being taken, being kidnapped. So for people to see that their fellow community members, their fellow LA people are coming out to support their people, fearlessly, bravely, I think that's actually pretty good for our audience. It gives them a sense of hope, it gives them a sense of community, and it gives them a sense of clarity in this moment. And, we're new, so it's our job just to show what's going on, show what's happening, and showing our people be strong. And when I say our people, I mean all of us here in LA, right? Being as strong in the face of fascism. Yeah, so then, thank you. I can go on and on, but I'll stop right there.
So the work that you all are doing it's also really difficult, especially right now, right? I mean, there are challenges to doing this deep work because right now people are scared, right? And one theme that I think, we all shared some insight before this conversation, and one thing that came up is that it's fear and vulnerability of our sources, right? Because right now we're all working with vulnerable sources. So how do you manage that? How do your organizations manage that? I mean, I'd love to hear about, when people are afraid to go on record, what do you do? What kind of conversations are you having in your newsrooms right now about truly informed consent? Because that's not something that was really that thoroughly discussed before. About protecting your sources, something that we didn't used to talk about as much, right? Any policies that are changing around anonymity, what are you doing to get the story out there, at the same time do it responsibly?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you were saying, so many people in Los Angeles and across the country are terrified right now. And from just a reporting perspective, it does produce a fair number of challenges in getting folks to be willing to speak with you, because these are such vulnerable moments, such dangerous things that they're talking about. As always, there's like different levels of confidentiality that you can offer a source. You can on the record, on background, anonymous, off the record. But especially right now, I think, as we were speaking about a little earlier, the informed consent of it all has been super important, because a lot of the time, folks at these demonstrations or folks that are directly impacted by immigration enforcement don't fully understand the consequences or the potential consequences of speaking with the press. it doesn't. I don't think that everybody fully grasps the added danger that they put themselves in. So it's incumbent on ethical reporters to tell them and really make sure that they understand the risks that they're putting themselves in. And I think, at least for Capital in Maine, where we have the time and kind of real estate to go into stories over a longer period of time, we are afforded the ability to sort of build trust throughout the reporting process. And that's been super key in getting folks to be willing to speak with us. Just one story that wasn't super it wasn't super long turnaround, but when I was filming DHS agents staging in Paramount, I recorded a video of a skater kid who was attacked by these Border Patrol agents. And I left that scene maybe 15 minutes after without having been able to speak with him. But after a week or two after that, he came up to me at a different protest, having recognized me from the coverage. And he had seen all the coverage I was doing since then. And without even trying, I had built trust with him, just because I think, like a lot of folks in Los Angeles doing amazing coverage, I think I tried to put the sort of community impact first, really tried to center local perspectives and local, ideas. And I think just showing folks that you're part of the community and that you have the community's back, I think goes a long way in getting folks to open up to you. But again, got to be careful in having them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say we definitely have been having a lot of conversations in our newsroom about how we work with vulnerable sources, how we approach those conversations, because as Jeremy mentioned, a lot of people aren't really aware of what a journalist's role is, about where this information that they're sharing could end up, even as much as on a website or on social media. It's different when you share it than when you see it written and shared on the internet. So some of the conversations include things like, let's be clear about what are you telling me right now, and the fact that I'm going to publish this, or what needs to be off the record, or do you feel safe sharing your first last name? The conversation of providing, not identifying people is also, I'm sure, expanding across so many newsrooms, and we're doing things differently because it's an important time to really think about our role, our responsibility. And for us, we see ourselves as part of the community as well, right? A lot of us we've been there for 15 years, and people know us and they trust us, but we also have to maintain that responsibility, because sometimes people are upset, they're mad, they're angry, and they want to just share it. But we have to kind of slow down and say, let's address this and see when do you actually have to write that story? When do you actually have to share a name? Or so one of the things that we have done also is we've created an ICE Raids playbook, where we sort of kind of walk the step-by-step what we do when we hear this, or who are the people and the trusted sources, because as we know, we can't get the information that we need from agencies. And so, what are the steps that we need to take, even during, when we get to the scene, when we are interviewing people, or even post-interview, or, so we're still expanding that playbook. We're learning so many things as we go. And I mean, I've talked to other journalists about it too. One one of the things that I want to continue doing is continue to talk to community organizations, to experts, to lawyers, to people who know about this language that we should be using, about what are the risks with, again, sharing this or that. So that's just one of them.
Yeah, can you remind me of the questions about protecting sources?
The question was about just working with vulnerable sources and just kind of what conversations are we having, with our teams, in our organizations, about truly informed consent, right? About protecting our sources, because, this isn't something that we used to have deep conversations about. And, reporting on deadline sometimes, it has been, it can be transactional. Just say that. You can go out there and get your story and talk to your person and come back. And when we're reporting on vulnerable sources, we really have to just sort of say, okay, talk to your editor, whoever it is, put a pin in that. Hang on. We have to really think this one through, right? Sometimes I tell my students this. You may get somebody who says, you know what? I'm angry. I don't care. Let them know my last name. Doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. That's where you have to say, stop. Think this through, okay? I know that you're angry, but this can really come back to bite you. And explain that. So again, truly informed consent, protecting sources who are vulnerable, not at this point even, abstract threats, but who face very real threats to themselves and their families. So we're talking about that. Anyway. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Very important. I think I can go over a couple things and something new that we're doing. So one of the things that we're thinking about and actively working on is we're working on moving away from Google, because Google will give up your information willingly. Google is a snitch. So we need to move away from it. I think, at least that's for what we believe. So we're doing that. We're also working on making more sources. Like, we just use like their first name. If their first name is a little bit too unique, then maybe we do something else. We're working with just like first names now. We're being more careful with identifying things. We had a situation that occurred, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago. Time is like not working for me right now. I'm sure it's not working for a lot of other people too. We heard that a large newsroom, a report that apparently community members are upset in Southeast LA that a vendor's name was published, full name, and the location of their cart. Community members are very upset about this, rightfully so, right? So I want to talk about privilege really fast. So for me, I've worked in the nonprofit industry for a minute here, right? I've worked in voting rights. I've also had a podcast. So I have been media trained. I'm sure lots of folks, maybe some folks here have been media trained. And if you're media, you don't need to be media trained. But we thought about this and we were talking about it. And we're like, what if we did a media training guide for our communities in Southeast LA? So it hasn't come out yet. It's coming out next week. So I hope this is a safe space, and I hope we can all share it later and we can co-publish it, all that great stuff when it comes out. But we're thinking about, the draft is done. We are going to put it out next week. And basically how to protect your story, how to vet journalists, how to check and see who is talking to you, right? Because we have a lot of journalists from a lot of places coming to Huntington Park right now, coming to Southeast LA that maybe haven't been there, in the past. So yeah, we want to make sure that our folks and our people over there are making sure that, or can vet journalists and can make sure that, we're handling our stories with care. So we're doing that. And yeah, we're protecting our sources more. I think that's all I really have to add, actually.
I just love hearing Huntington Park brought up. I'm from there too. I think it's amazing there are 2 journalists from HP on the stage right now. So, we're going to talk about building trust as well, right? Because, again, we talked a little bit earlier about the deep sourcing you do in the communities. So, for journalists who are covering immigrant communities or who are covering any community, really, just can you talk about getting at those deep community sources where, your reporters know who to call, they know where to go, especially again in, not everybody used to cover HP, right? So, I used to think I was the only reporter who ever went there before. But how do your organizations find those deep sources that keep the stories coming, that keep the tips coming? What kind of advice can you offer to the audience?
from a reporter's perspective, I guess, really just spending time in those places, building personal relationships with the people who's are impacted by the stories, who are involved in the stories that you are writing. I think that it's when there's like breaking news in a particular location that you don't have a lot of familiarity with, there's always the impulse to go there, try to get the story. But oftentimes that doesn't really result in very good coverage. What I think, as I was saying, I think in my previous answer, I think one of the things that I appreciate about Capital in Maine is just the ability to spend a lot of time on stories in communities, in different locations, with folks that I'm covering for a long time. And just really spending a lot of time with these people. And figuring out like the kind of landmarks in each community, who knows, like the bodega owners in certain communities, the people who are very connected with different people around. I think they act as a kind of nexus to connect you to the really like on the ground coverage of what's going on.
We've been in Boyle Heights for 15 years, so we also have the privilege of having established a good, source of folks there, connections, trust. I mentioned earlier how important it is for us to connect with nonprofits in the area and really be an ear in both ways, really. So that's a huge benefit to have. Another thing that I'll mention is that very unique and also similar as we were talking about us reporting in our communities. I was raised in Boyle Heights, so I have that also, that connection. If you're not familiar with Boyle Heights Beat, we started out as a high school journalism training program. And so we have had over 300 alumni who have graduated from our program, and a lot of, yeah. And so the students themselves become sources as well, right? They become the ones that are sometimes telling us about stories in their communities. A lot of the students there also have gone on to school, come back and have work for at Boyle Heights Beat. Several of our staff members actually are graduates of the program. It makes me feel very old because I've mentored some of them. So again, we just, trust building is one of the key components. If you can find people who either are from the community, have deep ties in the community, that's a huge part. Another thing I'll mention is just really going to the places where people are, seeing them face to face, and listening. Whether it's community engagement is a huge part of what we do, and so I know for small newsrooms sometimes it's really hard to do that, but it's so vital to your reporting. Even if it's from showing up to the library, the park. The farmers market and really listening to what people have to say. We've conducted surveys before to just really hear what are the concerns happening right now. Well, we just did one recently, last month, asking people what are the things that you most care about at this moment. Obviously, number one was ICE raids, and that we asked what's the thing you need most, and the thing they needed most was mental health resources. And so the way that we sort of do our work is we listen to our community and what are we going to do with that information. So next week we're actually having a mental health panel because just straight out of that survey to really serve our community and say, look, we're here to listen and to provide this service as well. So that panel will be in person and also in live streamed to protect anybody who doesn't want to be in person. So that's just a few of the things that you can do in your newsrooms as well.
So that leads into my next question. We're going to have to barrel through the last few questions here, but one thing that we are able to do as journalists is offer solutions, right? Especially at a time where a lot of people don't feel like they have a lot of answers or agency. We can at least try to provide people with a little bit of useful information that can give them some sense of agency. And I'd love to hear how your organizations are working to do that right now, as again, in the immigration space.
Yeah, I can start a little bit. So we are doing more guides. It took us a minute to do them, right? We've been working on them for the last month. I think the other thing that we're working on a couple of useful information. The other thing that we've been doing is we've been doing illustrations. So we've been hiring local illustrators from all over LA to make these beautiful pieces of artwork that really help contextualize and celebrate our communities, but also show the reality of what's happening in a way that's not traumatic. The folks on the LA Public Press staff, they're amazing. They're so amazing. We have a couple folks that have been impacted by what's going on. There's ICE that is very active in certain communities in LA that's more active than others. It's something that we're seeing in some neighborhoods more than others. So with that, we are also creating a guide right now that talks about how to navigate that, which is also coming out next week. I think I'm trying to think about what else. I had something else and I completely lost my train of thought. The other thing we're trying to show how community members are actively pushing back against some of these things that are happening. I think that's really important to give our communities hope for this time. I think I'm like drawing a blank right now. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Anybody else want to speak to that? Yeah.
Just share. I mean, I kind of mentioned it earlier, right? Like through our reporting and through showing what people are doing, how they're really taking matters into their own hands. I think that also inspires others to possibly do the same, or to go to their leaders and ask why you're not doing this. And the stories, the reporting also does that. I mean, we've seen it even before the raids, right? We bring attention to something that's lacking, and we know our city council members are watching. We've noticed sort of direct story publishes, motion happens. You see that. One example recently that I'll mention is a story that one of our reporters did around students who were asking for more protection at their school from LAUSD, and they were directly asking for dream centers. And no one was talking about dream centers anymore. Like, no one really talking about it anymore, right? But these students were asking as they were protesting, as they were thinking about what demands, because I think at one point they were just kind of walking out, right? But then they were like, what demands can I ask for? And so they asked for dream centers at every school, because hardly any schools actually had dream centers. And so what did we hear when the budget came out a few weeks ago? They were devoting $5 million for dream centers. And so these kinds of things are how we see our reporting sort of transfer into action and solutions that could help the broader community.
Thank you. Okay, since we're running out of time, there's one really important question. We didn't used to talk about this before, and I'm really happy that we are, right? 30 years ago, it was just kind of suck it up and move on to the next story. We can talk about this now because we do absorb trauma. We experience it ourselves, as you have, And so I want to ask you all, we'll start here with Jessica and Mariah. One thing that we've talked about before the panel is that, again, we're covering trauma in our own communities, right? Not to mention absorbing it from everyone else that we meet, right? Because again, and I'll just say, this is not a Latino issue. This is an everybody issue. All of LA is being affected by what's happening right now, right? And when we're reporting these stories, we are absorbing trauma. So how do you guys, because it feels personal in lots of ways, how do you cope? How do you keep your work from becoming mentally and emotionally overwhelming? Or is there a way to do that?
I'm so sorry. So what you all saw a second ago is definitely when I paused and I was just like, I'm actually still trying to figure out what that is for me. So I am both management, but you also can find me on the ground sometimes too. So I was actually out on the ground with Michelle Zacarias over there from Kalu News. And when we were putting on the No Kings protest, we were there when, tear gas was launched at protesters. And yeah, it was really scary. And the horses came out. And then also every single day I see these horrible stories. Every single day I'm looking for news stories. Every single day on my feed is just covered with horrible things happening. And it's not just something that I can be like, oh, that's happening somewhere else, and that's horrible too. It's like, oh my God, that's my friend. Oh my God, that's somebody I know. I know these places. I know these folks. It's actually been very disorienting. So I don't really have any great advice for that. But I did bring in a therapist, so I'm seeing her every week. Me and Brenda have a great chat once a week, and then I journal every day.
Sometimes you just have to hike to the top of a mountain and like cry, right? I mean, there's as Mariah mentioned, all of this constant flow of news and horrible things happening. When it's happening, the streets that you grew up in, and like to the people that look like your parents and your cousins. And so it's deeply impacting. A lot of us come from that lived experience. I was undocumented. And so you really take all of that in. So I personally, turn to family and friends. That's one of my, my outlets. In the newsroom, one of the things that I wanted to do early on, shortly after the election too, was sort of getting some trainings in for my things like risk assessment training, legal training, but one of the trainings was a must was mental health, and session with the whole newsroom. I hope we can that are helpful. We also have check-ins, talk things out. And we should have. Sometimes it's just you need to slow down and like figure how's everybody doing. I think we did that like right after. Also, I think it's like such a moment of like, hey, let's check in with, because we're human and we're people who. So, dance. I have a dance background, so I always say like, when in doubt, just put some good music and dance it out.
Before Jeremy begins, I mean, you had a unique experience recently. So, like, you were actually hurt reporting, right? So, yeah, but want to hear from you how you're coping, not just physically, but emotionally too.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the emotional and mental aspect of it all has been more difficult than the just like physical recovery. I was hit by a less lethal munition on June 9th in the stomach. Also tear gassed a bunch, and that really sucks. I think more than the physical pain, though, it like really the anxiety compounded on itself. And I found myself in a place where I was like really burning out. And I consider myself to be really normally quite a steady, not anxious person. So the sort of delta between my mental state usually and what I found myself in was really hard to deal with. So the most effective things that I've found is I've been going to therapy for years every week, which is great. I journal every day. I have a great social support network. And then also taking like a little bit of time off. Like time off has just been, oh my gosh, just even a day or two can really break the cycle of like the compounding of the trauma and gives you like the space to breathe. But even like on the ground in these situations, it's important to take like a few minutes like away from the sides of the skirmish line, like go to the next block, take a breath, like reassess where you are, and do like the safety protocols that you have to do on the ground. But yeah, just like breaks, friends, journaling.
Yeah, no, you both said, talk to somebody, therapists are a start. If you can't afford a therapist, you have friends, family, you have music, you have your kids. Look at them, they're beautiful, they're innocent. Just like really sort of like revel in the, the little comforts that you have. And everybody's heard of the Dart Center for Trauma and Journalism? Okay, check out their website. There actually is a toolkit for journalists covering violence and trauma. Some very helpful tips there. So do look into that. Yes.
We're merging. We're actually in the process of it. We're merging over to Proton Mail. And then we're going to get a suite of all these other different things. That's actually what our CEO is working on right now. So once he tells us what we're getting, I think in a month from now, I'll have way more to report. Our CEO, I'm very lucky. Matthew is a digital security person, so he's been on it. So I think in probably a month, I'll have a much better answer for you all. But Proton Mail, and then I forget what the other vendors we're going to be using for literally everything else.
That's the nature, especially for, for editors. I will say maybe Jeremy is a different thing, but you kind of have to multitask. I also have a background in breaking news, and that is like one of the most, that's one of the biggest skills you can have is multitasking. So, you set deadlines and you set focus time. You put things in your calendar like nobody bother me at this time. This is editing time. This is focus hour or whatever. I mean, that has been helpful so people don't start scheduling things in your calendar if it's empty. And check-ins are important with reporters as well, at least again, speaking as an editor. But yeah, it's not an easy one.
It is so hard. I think what I've learned, I try to focus on, okay, what stories can we do the best? And this is something I've learned from our editor-in-chief, Michelle. Michelle is like, Mariah, everybody's going to do this story. Newsrooms with a lot more folks, a lot more funding, they're going to hit this story and they're going to do it really well. Capital Maine is already doing this story and they have an amazing video for it. So what can we add that other folks maybe haven't added? So the aspiring Marine person, I think the big news story that day was that immigration raid happened in Southeast LA, and they tear gassed protesters, and they also almost hit protesters with their car. They charged at protesters. Awful. We put out a video about that too. But the LA Public Press version of that story was, okay, let's go find the person who was being tackled by immigration authorities. The other story about the No Sleep for ICE, we could have covered that story as just the video of the protest or like made it a breaking news hit, which is kind of where my mind was at the time. But Michelle was like, no, we're going to slow this down. We're going to we're going to have this narrative and let's see what actually happened. Let's slow it down a bit. And now it's this beautiful story about community resistance that inspired other people. So I think it's really thinking about your audience, what they need, what you can do, and how you can do it best. And how can you add to the conversation? First of all, I think citizen journalists, I think community journalists, I think folks that have large followings, like they're great. I think those of us that, work at a traditional newsroom, right, or any newsroom, I think a lot of us have learned ethics. A lot of us have learned certain things. I'm not saying it was perfect. And like if you went to journalism school or you learned in college, definitely not perfect. Lots of things that, we had to unlearn and learn again. But I think we need to kind of educate folks. We need to have mass education on how to cover protests. And I think I've actually already seen a lot of community members, a lot of community organizers really starting that work already, how to document protests in a way that's ethical, that's not harming people and not hurting people. I think we are all learning this together, right? Journalists, I know that for us, we are like, okay, now we have to start blurring people's faces out. We have to be recording people from behind, not in front. We have to be more careful now because we know that the state is going to be using those photos eventually, maybe, and we don't want to be putting a target on anyone's back. So I think maybe as media partners with our communities, we can probably elevate that information more to help educate other community members that are out and about and trying to, document what's going on. I don't like the idea of our communities being content. So I think we maybe need to teach people like our communities aren't content. So we're not for views. It's not for likes. It's, so I think we can probably put that into the media a little bit. We can put that into the world so that way people can think about that when they're out documenting. And yeah, I'm sure it'll be great later. I'm sure we'll all learn together and it'll work out.
At one, it's for the editors. What would you like to see from freelancers in the audience? If anybody wants to, what would you like to see?
Stories. I just like how this enforcement has impacted people in their daily lives. What has been appended from? Again, I had friends who had to cancel birthday parties, graduation parties, and things like that. And then again, more stories of resilience and hope and power. Some examples.
Yeah, so the stories that we want are very similar. We want stories that are uplifting our communities, really breaking down what's going on. We also really want to make sure we're highlighting communities that aren't being highlighted right now. So we want to be making sure that we're highlighting Asian communities, Black communities, queer communities, immigrants from everywhere, because we're all being targeted right now. All of our communities are being targeted. So we want to make sure that nobody's getting left out. I want more pitches. It would be great. LApublicpress.org/pitches. So I'm looking forward to seeing more pitches.
Thank you all so much. A huge hand for our panelists. And I'll hand it back to Ari now.
I would love to take photos after, so I might have you guys stand to the side of the stage if that's okay. But guys, please, let's give it up for all, including Leslie, for moderating that conversation right then. Thank you so much.